Hello and welcome to the Waitress. I'm honored to have today my friend Joe Capps. He's an artist, a writer, a painter, a screenwriter, and a musician. And we study in the same MS screenwriting. So, how are you doing, Joe?
I'm very good, thank you. Yeah, just been relaxing this morning, which is nice. It's a bit of a privilege to be able to do that on a Tuesday morning at the moment. But yeah, I'm doing well, all things considered. Thank you.
That's
How are
great.
you? How are you?
I'm good. Like you, just relaxing, enjoying the sunshine in Scotland. Yeah. So, can you take us briefly through your professional, traditional career and your creative endeavors career? I don't know how it started. So,
Yeah,
you want to take us through that?
they've always kind of coexisted together. So after I finished my undergraduate degree in 2013, which was in English literature, I kind of floated around for a little while. Got a little bit sick of academia. So that route sort of through a master's course or into, you know, sort of the world of research and academia didn't appeal to me at all. So I stayed in limbo for a little while, painting a little bit and traveling a little bit, working in a cafe a little bit, sort of realizing that cliche that English graduates really don't neatly fit into a job. Which was fine, but it was a case of trying to work out, okay, well, which direction do I want to go? Which thing do I want to focus on? Do I want to focus on writing, which is kind of, the main sort of driving force behind the decision to study English literature in the first place, or do I want to sort of step away from that and think, okay, I've enjoyed that path, but actually I have this itch, which is to keep painting. Do I want to, almost gamble and do that instead? So obviously at that stage, I wasn't especially established at all in terms of my art. And I basically ended up needing to supplement that work with a job. So I worked a couple of part-time jobs, and then I was lucky enough to get a job as a teacher at Kendal College, which I suppose is the other cliche about English graduates, that you eventually fall into teaching. So that was a lot of fun, and I think it started off being very, very part-time. So I would only do maybe 2 or 3 days a week, with the thinking that, okay, I'll still have plenty of free time to do painting and to do writing and to do music and all the other things that I enjoy that maybe aren't enough, it's not enough substance to invest in completely. And obviously, with my foot in the door at college, that slowly started to take over. The nature of teaching, obviously, is that it's the sort of job that isn't especially easy to switch off from. So I found that I was losing my weekends to marking and planning. There's my door. I was, wanting to spend my free time with friends and socializing. So it was a tricky thing, and it eventually got to the point. I mean, after 7 years, where my painting was slowly growing in the background, that I thought, actually, I kind of could do this for the next 30 years, and that is terrifying. Mm. So yeah, so that's kind of what's brought me here now, is deciding to step away from that to honor those itches that I mentioned, because otherwise you'd always be wondering.
Yeah. That's amazing. Actually, can you tell us how old you are right now?
Yeah, I'm 29.
Okay.
So I started teaching when I was 22, 23. I'm basically, in a great way, sunk my 20s into teaching, which was a really valuable thing to do. But also, yeah, I think it's time maybe to look out for myself a little bit again.
Yeah, I think it's never too late, but
yeah.
But yeah, the 30s is a good time to get back into it. So what did you want to do as a kid, and were you already painting and writing very young? When did you start painting? Yeah.
So I remember I always used to draw. Was my thing as a young child. I always used to draw. Like, I was fascinated with. I used to draw a lot of dinosaurs.
Okay.
I was trying to work out why that might have been, and I think it was just a combination of, having little craft magazines that you'd buy at the newsagents that kind of encourage that sort of thing. But there's like a nice childhood fantasy element to dinosaurs. And I think it felt like the sort of thing that when you got to a certain age, people would tell you that they didn't exist. You know, like with, I don't know, dragons or the tooth fairy. And there was something really appealing about, oh, actually, this is this really strange mythological truth to the world. And that was my first connection to art, really. My memory is painting dinosaurs and cavemen and all these prehistoric things. And it was essentially trying to replicate photos. For a long time, as a child, I would have a picture of, well, dinosaurs. Or I remember drawing Wayne Rooney when I was about 12. Probably only one step away from a caveman. But yeah, so I do lots of that. I remember getting very angry when things didn't go well, which now I suppose I can reflect on and think is sort of part of a perfectionist persona. But you know, using blunt HB pencils in a lined paper sketchbook at the age of 8, I probably should have given myself a little bit more, you know, a little bit more grace with that. But yeah, I've always drawn. I studied art at school. I'm not classically trained at all. I studied art at school though, and that's where I started experimenting with oil paint, which is pretty much exclusively what I use now. And in terms of writing, I loved writing stories. Any excuse that we got to write stories at school was a big win, basically. I was lucky enough to have a really close group of creative friends from the age of about 4 years old.
Oh, wow.
And they're still my friends today. You know, I grew up in a very small village in the Lake District, very remote and idyllic in all the ways that you would imagine. And we basically ended up just, you know, creating worlds together. And we wrote stories. We had these incredibly grand plans for narratives about gods and elements and amongst other projects. But this is when we were 8 or 9, you know. So I think we even tried to write a book together. I don't know quite how far we got at that age, but it's always been something that I hoped one day that I would be able to do for work. And yeah, it's never been a question of enjoyment. I've always loved it. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. And so you mentioned you were a teacher for many years. I think I have 2 questions around that. Like, so when you decided to finally switch to your creative endeavors, how easy was it, or how difficult, and how is it going?
Yeah.
And I guess I also wonder, because you had this supportive group of friends, but what did people around you think when you decided to quit your job, and how is that going as well?
Yeah, okay. So it was, well, it wasn't an easy decision insofar as it would be completely sacrificing financial stability, right? I was in a stage in my life anyway, in my personal life, basically, where it felt like a good opportunity for a clean cut and a fresh start. So that made the decision easier. And what complicated it, I think, and it's easy to reflect on this now lightheartedly, and it is not a lighthearted thing at all, but I decided that I was going to leave at the start of 2020. And with the pandemic, it was a really tough initial decision as to whether this really was the best year to take the big risk. And I ultimately decided that it had to be, you know, because I think if you don't listen to yourself and do the things that you actually want to do, then, you know, you either will live with regret or you will never do them. So the risk kind of doubled a little bit there. Obviously, we're studying in Edinburgh at the moment, and it's really enjoyable, and we're in an unusual situation that everybody is in. But I don't regret it. I think it was definitely the right thing to do, and it's going well. It's a challenge, it's a tricky time to be a student at the moment, but I think it's an even trickier time to be a teacher.
Yeah.
So you know, insofar as still have a huge amount of respect for my colleagues and my friends who are still doing the work at the moment, but I don't envy them.
Mm.
You know, it's tricky. My network of friends have been incredibly supportive. They always, they always will be, and they always have been, and my family too. And I'm in a privileged position to be able to say that as well. I think, I think it gets to a certain stage with teaching. I don't know if this is just me, but it gets to a certain stage with teaching where it almost feels like, well, with this, aside from the students themselves, who are always wonderful and always inspiring, you notice yourself falling in sort of patterns of circularity and almost this sort of mechanical delivery, which isn't good for anybody. And I think as soon as I realized actually that this is just that I'm stuck on a loop, the loop of September to September, or the loop of, oh, it's this lesson on Othello this week. You realize that you end up scripting your life a little bit. And there's been something incredibly freeing about breaking from that script, which is a scary thing too, because, I've just realized that I'm talking in script metaphors and we're doing a screenwriting course, but without knowing quite where the narrative's going, it's scary, but I think I needed scary. I think I needed to let go of that safety net for a little while.
Sure. And so looking back, the fact that it was the pandemic actually and how everything went, wasn't it actually the best year to take that risk?
Well, arguably, it made...
for you personally, of course. But.
Yeah, it made a lot of decisions for me, which I think was an easier thing. It simplified the process by narrowing my options. Mm-hmm. Whether that's a good thing or not, I'm still not entirely sure, but it did definitely accelerate, ideas to, okay, well, this is actually going to happen now, and this is going to happen in these ways. Silly things like looking for a flat in Edinburgh was really difficult. I wasn't able to come for various reasons to viewings, for example. So doing that virtually was completely new experience. But yeah, I think everything's unusual at the moment. Everything's scary. Everything's awful in a lot of ways. Why not use it as an opportunity to kind of reflect on how short and, difficult life can be, and do the things that you want to do. I think it's been really reaffirming in that way that actually, we can't take life for granted.
Yeah.
And, it's been a strange time to be trying to pour time into art and writing, because I think especially when the pandemic started, it felt slightly indulgent to be saying, but also I'm painting. It felt, there was maybe a period of 2 or 3 weeks where things were really, really getting bad. And it was a difficult time to be thinking about what art means and why actually, what its value is in society when trauma is happening. And that was an interesting few weeks. Obviously, over time, I think the art world kind of caught up, and I don't think that was just experienced by me. I will say, I think that was a general phenomenon that I noticed. And I think, after a while, I think things got recontextualized a little bit, and there were all sorts of incredible movements on social media to support care workers and to really find the voice of, I'm talking about visual art really here, I'm thinking about Instagram specifically, to find the voice of art in the changed circumstances.
Yeah, for me at least, art has such a profound meaning that it is actually in times like this that it becomes more meaningful and more important. But as an artist, as a writer, then there's a lot of self-reflection, like, do I really have a role, and should I be doing something else? And yeah, of course. And how personally did the pandemic impact you in your creative practice, or how did it inform it? And I don't know your situation, but what's the link between mental health and creativity, and how do we keep going on creating and producing when not everything is going great?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think I'll start just by kind of outlining how it impacted my sort of day-to-day work. Obviously, with the sort of global factors aside, I have always lent on writing and painting as almost a way of relaxation, firstly. Also, kind of this cathartic, okay, well, this is something that I can put myself into, and this is something that I can express myself with and connect to other people through. And those things became incredibly important during the pandemic. I mean, during the first wave, I was living with my sister and her boyfriend, Dan, in the spare room that was probably, 6 foot by 6 foot. So I had a fold-out bed that would, sit on the sofa during the day, and then it would fold back into my bed, and I'd go to sleep in the same sort of square foot that I'd been spending the whole 24 hours. And I had a desk in the corner to paint exclusively. And yeah, it was really important for me in the pandemic to be able to do that, because yeah, I think the real reason that I do this stuff is because I kind of have to. It seems like a bit of a cliche again thing to say, but I can't stop painting stuff. I can't stop writing stuff because I don't, it's so much part of who I am that without it, I feel a little bit lost. Or I feel like there's something that I need to do or say that I don't quite know how to do or say. So it became incredibly freeing for me once I was able to kind of unshackle myself from the kind of, the kind of wider perspective of, okay, well, what's my role in all of this? And I think what actually ended up happening in that kind of 4 to 5 months that I spent in that tiny room was that I produced probably more paintings than I ever have, because it became such an important functional part of living that it was just like, okay, I'm going, instead of going to watch something on TV, this is actually where I'm going to put myself now. And you can't express yourself with other people. You can't express yourself by experiencing the same things that we're so used to experiencing. Then actually, where does that take us? Where does that stuff go? And it was kind of through art that I was able to relax, that I was able to give the illusion of forward motion in a time that was pretty static. And yeah, I think there's an element of, that sort of lifestyle can become unhealthy too, but I think I balanced it. At the time, I started running as well. So that was almost the anti-painting, right? Where it was, okay, now I'm present in the real world, which is damaged in this really unique way, but it's still beautiful. It was the middle of summer. It was still, bakingly hot. And then that sort of clearer headspace was kind of balanced with the focus. But yeah, it was, I don't know where I'd be without art, really. I think it's one of those things that's, that this has reaffirmed again, quite how much it kind of defines who I am and how I view the world and how I spend my time and how I orient my priorities in a time of crisis, essentially,
That's great. It's great that you were able to channel all of that into your art. And do you Then do you ever get creative blocks, blank pages, blank canvas, and how do you deal with that?
All the time, all the time. I think it's one of those things that's best not to kick against. I think sometimes in visual art, the fury of that can be quite freeing too. I think as soon as you stop caring so much, and it's easier to do with a paintbrush or a palette knife than it is with a blank page of an A4 document, to just start splashing color on it, and kind of use that kind of impetus that comes from not being able to get anywhere to say, okay, well then let's forget any preconceptions of what I want here, and let's just almost rip this whole thing apart and see what happens. And some of the paintings that I've enjoyed the most, I think, have been ones that have been reworked over previous aborted attempts. I don't think there's really an answer for a creative block, other than just accepting that it's part of the process always. With writing, again, I'm finding at the moment that walking and running is really helping me get some objective distance from detail. And I think it's always the detail that kills you, that you can end up tying yourself in knots that don't really matter quite easily, which grind you to a halt. The other thing is it's always good to start working on different projects. If one of them is giving you trouble, or you find that you hit a bit of a wall, I always have, for example, 5 or 6 paintings on the go at once, because I know that if I suddenly lose quite what I want or where it's going, then you literally just turn to the side and it's almost like a breath of fresh air. And I imagine the same thing is true of my experience with writing as well. I think, if you get locked in the cupboard of one particular idea, it's incredibly hard to gain any distance from purpose and intention and style. And even if nothing becomes of the second or third document that you start working on, then it's at least a refresher in terms of, okay, this is my voice. This is a brand new character that has nothing to do with them, or a brand new setting. And almost building in sort of adjacent piles rather than worrying about one getting especially high.
Great. And so then it leads me to the question of balance, because for me, it's really hard to be in several projects at once. And I don't know how to deal with that. So you seem to have it all kind of together. Like I see you in VMA, like meeting the deadlines and doing great things, and you're doing all the paintings and the writing. So how do you balance, I guess, the writing and the painting, but also your personal life and your creative life? And how do you keep it all together? Oh, and also, how do you balance working for customers, commissions, and working for your own passion project?
Well, it's really hard. Firstly, I'm pleased that I managed to give the illusion of having everything together, but I do assure you that it is an illusion. I'm not very good at time management. Really, things like deadlines are useful for that, and whether it's course deadlines or professional deadlines or commission deadlines, because you get to a certain point and then a fire is lit underneath you and it needs to happen. But I'm so lucky that with writing and painting, and I am lucky, but I've also curated a sort of lifestyle, or at least a short-term lifestyle, where I'm allowed to do those things. But I'm lucky that I love those things. When things accumulate and start to pile up, at least at the core of the work, I enjoy the process. I have found that with commissions, things tend to bottleneck slightly. Obviously, around Christmas and things do add up in completely expected ways because of presents and everything. But in those times, I think I've had to step away from my own personal projects, or the things that I have liked to spend time on speculatively, or with a gallery exhibition in mind. And that's okay. I think I care about commissions as much as I care about my own work, and if anything, it removes that level of kind of pressure, creative pressure in the same way where you have to kind of conceive an idea from nothing and explode it. You know, you already have this brief, which is fun and liberating in its own ways. But it's very difficult at the moment. I think all our usual processes, you know, I have no studio space. I am one of those people who likes to write in cafes, which has been impossible since December. So I think I managed to at least slightly get by keeping things separate. I still like to go outside to work and come back in, so I don't have to do that. My bedroom at the moment is my painting space, not my writing space. You know, I would need 2 desks or 2 rooms to be able to do those things simultaneously. So it's important, I think, to compartmentalize still. And essentially, yeah, I mean, you know, there've been times in my life where there've been a lot of late nights painting. You wake up the next day and the colors are slightly different to what you imagined at 3 a.m. because of the yellow light and the lack of natural light, but there we go. At the moment, one of the things that painting allows is for kind of absorption of other media whilst painting, and whether that is watching films or whether that, as is mostly the case, it's listening to music, it still kind of can feel like that relaxing time, you know, that time where you are exploring new things in the world that you've been meaning to catch up on, or yeah, I think being goal driven is important as well. I think with commissions and deadlines, it's nice to be able to draw a line under things and start new things fresh after that. I do have a couple of pieces that I've been working on for 6 months, and it just, after a while, it gets to the point where it's like, okay, this is like another presence in my house that's been here for so long, and you've seen it change and still hasn't quite settled down into what it will finally end up being. And in some ways, that's more, the freedom of being able to do that is a lot more pressurized than these intense, you know, regular deadline-based commitments, you know.
Yeah, I understand. And do you have any routine, or do you just follow the flow of your day?
Well, a typical day would be, I would get up, I would go for a run. I try to run 3 times a week, and I like to start the day like that a little bit, because it firstly gets me out of my bedroom, and it's a bit of a head clearer, isn't it? And then I would prioritize writing. At the moment, we have a lot of deadlines. That's why I would like to be working on my own writing projects. I think actually that's the one thing that this year some things had to go. I'm doing my own, you know, my own art projects, commissioned art projects. I'm doing writing for the course in all sorts of different ways. My own personal writing has had to take a little bit of a backseat, but I'm excited to get that started again once you know, the deadlines for the masters have passed. So I prioritize writing in the daytime, because otherwise I will never get it done. And then I tend to paint in the early evening, whilst listening to music, and essentially that's my relaxing time. But obviously there's an element of socializing, there are personal relationships to maintain, and nothing is as smooth as that. Nothing is as simple as run, write, paint. It doesn't really work like that every time in practice at all. But that's loosely how I've tried to frame my time.
Where do you find inspiration for your writing, for your painting, for your music? Who inspires you, or what?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's a really tricky one to answer, because it's hard, because I still see my expression through art and through writing as slightly disparate. I think there are some common themes, I suppose. I end up writing and painting. I think I'll talk about painting first. I think it comes from originally I talked about this kind of photorealistic style that I tried to prioritize when I was, like, you know, between the ages of 8 and 17, perhaps. And a lot of my subject matter now comes from destroying that form and that clarity. And I think it's probably true of most artistic pursuits that, you know, once you kind of learn how to do something, the fun and the real expression is then, okay, well, break those rules again. So I've done quite a lot of kind of deconstructive portraiture recently, for all the obvious reasons that we are all inside our own heads being torn in different directions. So, you know, those general themes of identity and self will always be important to any artist, because that is the nature of subjective experience. That is how humans see the world, right? Through these skewed, ripped apart heads. I've been focusing quite a lot on the conflation of the natural world with the human or technological world. I think a lot of great art is kind of inspired by having two ideas together that are either jarring, or there's this cognitive dissonance, or almost finding harmony in things that don't necessarily sit together, but, you know, reflect some sort of pattern in the world or pattern in nature. So I do end up producing some cynical pieces about technology. I do think about the relationship between human construction and things like climate change, and, you know, the inevitable decline of the natural world that's happening around us. You know, it's tricky, isn't it? Because lots of this stuff is tapping into kind of wider political and social concerns. And then commissions tend to be a little bit more direct. So I think there's always a bit of a push and pull with this sort of thing. But yeah, in an artistic sense, or in terms of visual art, it tends to be environment, technology, and the perils therein, and, you know, self and identity that seem to be coming through at the moment. You know, in summer, I did some pieces that were, you know, inspired, or not inspired is the wrong word even, but kind of motivated by reactions to senseless violence that were, you know, embittered by political shambles. And I think those pieces happen in sort of white hot bursts. You know, it's almost like not sitting down trying to think about, okay, well, what elements of life can be observed and combined and repurposed. It's almost like that decision doesn't have to happen. It just, you know, there's this instinctive attack element to art at times, I think. And obviously with the year, or at least even more than that, the year that we've had, those moments for worse, I suppose, have been coming up more often. There's more stuff to sort of motivate fury and injustice, and, you know, it can feel so kind of impotent as an artist, being so removed from actual change. You know, protests and things aside, there's been a lot to process recently, and a lot of anger and a lot of confusion, and sometimes that stuff has to live somewhere, or has to go somewhere. And it's been, over the past year, I have noticed that in my work. I think it has been sort of fueled by emotion a little bit more than it has been in previous years. When it comes to writing, I tend to find myself, I mean, I'm a big lover of kind of American postmodern literature, right? So it kind of comes with the same instinct to tear apart form. So I end up doing these sort of stupidly ambitious stylistic pieces, at least in my prose writing, that's kind of to do with the construction and explosion of character, and it's to do with, you know, considering what to what extent can I build something and then tear it down again and still be functional, you know. But also thematically, I'm very motivated by society's sort of prescribed gender expectations. I write a lot about the destructive nature of masculinity, and, you know, the problems with the patriarchy. I also end up writing a lot about technology again, because I think that's something that is incredibly scary. You know, there was that deep fake that someone did of someone did. Oh, what am I thinking of? Of Tom Cruise. Sorry, I couldn't think of his name, which is not a bad thing. That someone did of Tom Cruise the other day, and that was kind of aligned with this website that I'd been checking out, that was thispersondoesnotexist.com, which is a really scary AI website that just creates human faces that are entirely believable, that aren't real people. And nothing scares me more than that. Nothing scares me more of imagining children having to go through secondary school where people can mock up fake videos of each other, like, not to mention the political implications and how, you know, that is this ultimate kind of ability to, you know, distance someone's self from repercussions, you know, through fake avatars or through terrifying stuff. So that stuff ends up kind of, I suppose the fear of that stuff ends up motivating my writing a little bit too. Just because of the rate that things are accelerating and the kind of seemingly moral decline that social media and fake news has kind of, enforced or at least encouraged that deterioration of sense. But yeah, I think in my head they're still quite different. I do wonder, and I do enjoy the prospect of bringing them together a little bit more neatly. When I say them, I mean visual art and writing going forwards.
All right, yeah, no, it's really interesting, and I had a question pop up in my head when you were speaking. Will there still be art? When maybe art as well, when the world goes perfectly well and there are no more problems? Do artists still have a role?
I mean, I think humans always need to communicate, right? And you know, there is this element. I think that art is reactionary, or at least it's in some senses art is reactionary, right? I think it's an almost, you know, it's this power to the people. This is the voice on the ground. This is the stuff that actually has the power to unite and undercut authority. But yeah, I like to believe, I don't know whether that's an optimistic viewpoint, but I like to think that if the world was perfectly harmonious, which I don't think it's possible ever to be honest, unfortunately. I think the human emotion is an incredibly strong and prevalent thing, and I think those emotions would just be as strong, but perhaps in a different direction. And that's not to say all the pieces of art that are created are motivated by fear and anger. You know, there are plenty of pieces that are inspired by love and desire and hope and freedom and these things that, you know, would presumably still exist and inspire in spite of a lack of conflict, you know. But maybe one day we'll find out.
We probably won't see that, us at least, but yeah. And how do your different forms of art communicate between each other? Do they communicate between each other? And yeah, how do you work with that?
I think subconsciously. Yeah, I end up. I think I get hung up on particular motifs. I think that happen almost subconsciously. So I end up, you know. I think both come from the same point. Both probably come from my personal life or my reaction to, you know, social events. So they both kind of end up spinning out from the same source in slightly different directions. But you could map a line across. You know, I'm writing a script at the moment that's called Nightjar, and I've painted a nightjar. Right? There's these sorts of things happen subconsciously because it's almost like for a moment there's an objective study of something. And often I don't notice it until it's already happened. I mean, that one was more explicit because it is a specific animal. But sometimes, you know, I wrote a short script recently called Cell that was about somebody who couldn't cope having lost their mobile phone. And then a week later, I painted a piece called Screen Time, which is, you know, a gorilla and their child looking at a mobile phone by a bus stop, which was in my head motivated by, you know, the stasis of pandemic and the strange and perhaps unhealthy habits that have been adopted during that time. But I realized that I was saying exactly the same thing as I wanted to in the Cell film. And, you know, the theme was clearly something that I was preoccupied with and that I was thinking about, but then it kind of offshot in two different directions. So there is this kind of intertextuality, this interrelationship between my work, yeah. But sometimes even I have to stop and notice it, you know. Yeah.
So that's a question that really interests me. Do you start from structure? Do you start from theme? Do you start from character? And also, what's your take on rational versus intuition? And yeah, how do you work with that?
Yeah, I think I'm theme driven. I'm theme driven. I'd like to say that I was character driven. But actually, I think it happens the other way around. And then afterwards, it's kind of trying to work out how certain pieces and ingredients can exist within a concept. So I like to, I mean, this isn't always how it happens, but I like to have a general kind of aesthetic instinct or feeling about a direction or purpose that I want a piece to have in writing and in painting. And then zoom out, think about, okay, well, how can this world exist and what components need to exist in that world? Structure is probably the thing that I experiment with least, I would say. I think that comes from, you know, a fear of control a little bit, in, you know, maybe there would be some merit again in, I talk about, you know, probably contradicting myself here. I talked about deconstructing a minute ago, and I think in terms of writing, there's sort of a difficulty in the editing process that comes with having I find it easier to paint over a piece than I do to take out the middle of a story, for example. And that's possibly something that I'm learning at the moment, how to be ruthless with your own ideas and with your own passions in terms of projects. Yeah, I think theme is central to everything that I do. Otherwise, it just becomes characters talking or pieces of work that maybe look nice but don't actually come from anywhere that is meaningful. And the second question about intuitive thinking versus rational thinking, I try. But I think I'm inherently a rational person to a fault. I would say it possibly is related to this idea of control that I just mentioned, but it's quite important, I think, to be able to let that go. And, you know, maybe if that is hollowing the middle out of your story or losing something that you love, you know, kill your darlings and all that. But yeah, I'm learning to be more intuitive. I think, you know, the past year has really reinforced the importance, like I said before, of listening to your kind of gut instinct and seeing where it takes you. I think, and there is this, I mentioned before, this kind of innate impulse to create things. And I think that is ultimately instinctive, you know, I think that is, that comes from that place. And then it's just a case of controlling the rational prism that it's kind of reflected through, or that takes over at a certain point.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that would be my answer is that I think sometimes the intuitive brain starts things off and then has to force through rational boundaries sometimes to fully, yeah, because it's freeing, right? It's completely freeing to listen to your intuition and shut off your brain for a while.
Yeah, I find it interesting that you mentioned that it was easier to deconstruct on your painting and less so on your writing.
Yeah.
And I do wonder if it's because you have more confidence into the painting, or if it's related to the medium, because words are more related to the rational side of our brains. So it's easier to be visually instinctive, I would say.
So I missed the end of that question, Lucy. I think It might have been my connection.
I think it was mine. It's fine. So I was saying, I do wonder, because you mentioned deconstructing on your painting and the ability to do that and start over. So I do wonder if it's about confidence because you've been painting for longer and screenwriting is something newer, or if it's related to the medium because imagination and intuition is more visual and the words relate more to the rational. So I don't know, what's your take on that?
It's a really neat way of kind of processing it. I think it probably is, intuitive visual stuff versus rational framework stuff that comes with writing. I also think it's easier to enforce permanent change with painting, right? I think if you're impulsive as a painter, you can't undo it.
Yeah.
Whereas you can obsess in finicky detail about the positioning or the phrasing of a line or paragraph or dialogue interchange. And Command Z can instantly revert back, and that invites all sorts of paranoia. But there's a daringness about change in painting that is part of why the medium is so so interesting, because it rewards and punishes instinct so quickly. Whereas in writing, I think the process, the level of commitment that it takes in writing is, you really have to convince yourself over and over and over again that something is a good idea to stick with. Whereas in painting, if it's happened, it's happened, and that's exciting, and you can build from a new change. So I guess the permanence of the medium that allows for more intuitive expression.
That's really interesting. Really, really interesting. I like that. And you mentioned that you are not working currently on all your other personal writing projects. So you looking to do more prose, or what are you looking to do?
Yeah. So my as far as my writing background goes, I did a course that was studying prose writing, studying poetry, and I love prose writing, and I will always do it. Okay. I've got a couple of drafts of a couple of books, and I would like to get a couple more under my belt, and I can't wait to start something new like that. But screenwriting has really been a great exercise in restraint and being economical with language and purpose and sort of forward thrust. And again, I'm hoping, it might be asking a lot of myself, but I'm hoping that I can do those things in tandem going forwards. It's a bit like, it's a different way of communicating these themes that we talked about. If the theme starts from within, it's another strand or another facet of expression that is entirely in my head distinct from prose writing. It's a completely different pursuit. And I think it's been shocking and, kind of revealing this year to me quite how different it is as a kind of, as a method of working. So yeah, I hope to be able to do these things in tandem. I don't know whether that will always be possible. I've been one of those people for a long time who really enjoys creating in lots of different ways, but that doesn't necessarily suit the way that society is set up, really. It would be nicer to have a bit more security than that. But also, I think, I will not stop getting excited about new projects. I think, but I hope I can work on both. I think the reason that I chose to do screenwriting for this master's was because I didn't have a clue how to do it. Whereas I felt relatively comfortable with the way that prose functions. I feel now that, or at least by the end of this year, it will be another option. Another way of sharing experience and communicating ideas.
Definitely. And do you think a single idea, we already touched a bit on this, but a single idea is aimed at a specific format? It's calling for a specific format. And yes, of course, we can decline it and adapt and do different things, but is it at the core meant for one single format?
I think that's what's so freeing about having options. Is there actually? Yes, I think there are different ways of doing the same thing, but you're right that some concepts are suited better, I think, to different forms. And the real immediacy, and it's to do with how these things are packaged. I talked about kind of when someone sees a piece of art, a message is communicated in a split second, right? And it sort of triggers these impulses of either connectivity or disgust or whatever it might be. A novel is completely the opposite of that, because it takes you anything between 200 and 600 pages, whatever, more, less, to communicate an idea. And it's a real investment in philosophy almost, and in really trying to compute and transmit a more prolonged or sustained idea through different means. Screenwriting is probably a really nice compromise between those two, because not only is it visual, it's also time bound. If you sit through a film, it lasts 2 hours. If you read a novel, it can take you as long, it could take you a lifetime if you wanted it to. So I think there's definitely something in the different immediacy of the mediums. And obviously some ideas lend themselves more to visual extremes, whereas some of them, maybe in terms of prose writing, are a little bit more sort of abstract in the sense of thought and the sense of kind of, yeah.
So do you find creativity anywhere else in your day-to-day life? We haven't really talked about your music, but you mentioned you listen to a lot of music. And I don't know, do you find creativity other places? How is it part of your life beyond what you've been talking about?
Yeah, well, music, firstly, to talk about that, I think is probably the most important. I mean, I'm a rabid consumer of music. I live for it, and I don't think I could work without it in any sense. I'm one of those people who listens to music while I write. I listen to music while I paint. It informs all sorts of things about, I really like listening to contemporary music. I like listening to music that has come out incredibly recently. So it's a real way of staying engaged with contemporary sort of ideas, but also themes, aesthetics, noticing patterns in things as well. And it's just very inspiring, I think, to be reminded of all the people who are creating things against the odds at the moment. So music is incredibly important to who I am and how I work. And I'd probably be listening 24/7 if it was feasible. I mean, I mentioned before that I grew up in the Lake District, and I think it's provided me with a real sense of, the power of the natural world, right? It's really hard to visit the Lake District and not feel the weight of its natural beauty. And that sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, but it's a really important. And I think, as a child, I maybe took this for granted a little bit. I think that's what happens when you grow up in a certain place, is that actually anywhere that is not that place becomes appealing after a while. But having moved away and then gone, back home in various cycles, it's an incredibly inspiring place to live and to visit. I wish I'd done more traveling, and perhaps after restrictions are lifted, then that will be the next adventure. But definitely the natural environment, or at least areas of kind of untouched natural environment, which I'm again lucky enough to come from an area that has plenty of those, are definitely inspiring as well. And I enjoy doing quite traditional landscape paintings too. I think some of the first pieces that I really sunk a lot of time into were local landscape pieces. It's a real kind of, it's not quite the sort of fiery turbulence of the Yorkshire moors, but there's this real colourful tranquility in the Lake District that is not only kind of a useful reminder to slow down, to actually look up from the screens that we spend our whole lives sort of hooked to, but also, a real kind of visual reminder of how how great the world can be, you know. Yeah.
So I'm going to put a few of your paintings at the end of the video. But do you want to say something about your painting, your art, something you haven't said yet, and I haven't asked you about?
I'm just really excited to keep going. I'm looking forward to working bigger. I say this all the time. I want to work bigger, but it's just a case of feasibility at the moment. So hopefully when I'm able to access a studio space after all this is over, I'm really excited to kind of explode the scale of not just the things that I'm working on, but also the themes as well. And just really excited. I think you said that you're going to include a couple of links to my Instagram page as well. I would say about Instagram, it's a tricky one, but I generally not a big believer in social media, but there seems to be something that works in Instagram for at least for visual artists. So that's good. There's all sorts on there. I think I'll leave it for people to have a little look.
That's great. So if people want to contact you, they can contact you about commissions or anything on the Instagram page?
Yeah, it's just at JMK Caps, just through there. Just drop me a message. I'll reply to everyone and anyone. It's nice for people to reach out. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And I want to finish on the last question for you. What brings you joy these days?
I mean, the process of creating. The process of creating is kind of the headline here, is that I do it because I love it and I do it because I have to. And regardless of end product, it's a really enjoyable way to spend your time, I think, is learning about something while it's being built. And no matter, whether there's all sorts of different ways to build something. And with each variety, there's a lot to learn about art and about the world and about yourself and about the future and about the past. And yeah.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me, Joe, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you next week, and have a good day. Bye.